Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Having served as a member of both the Devolution and Further Powers Committee and the Finance Committee in this Parliament, I cannot help but feel that a gaping hole is about to open in my life as the Scotland Bill and the fiscal framework discussions no longer play such a prominent role. But I want to pay tribute, Presiding Officer, to the convenership of Bruce Crawford. One of the necessities of a Thursday morning committee is that the timescale can be truncated in terms of the ability to take evidence, and that requires the convener to run a tight ship. And I think most people would accept that in that respect Mr Crawford ran a very tight ship, but at the same time was very cognisant of the fact that he wanted to ensure that all members of that committee had an opportunity to have their input to the evidence-taking sessions. So I think he is to be congratulated wholeheartedly on his efforts in that regard. And also the clerking team, who have put in a phenomenal amount of work to make sure that the committee was kept well briefed, well informed and fed and watered as well, which was always welcome. In terms of the debate that we've had so far today, I think we have seen a number of very thoughtful contributions, particularly the final contributions in this Parliament from Annabel Goldie, Alex Salmond and Duncan McNeill. And I was interested when Duncan O'Neill analogised the Scottish Parliament's transition to that of somebody attaining the various stages of life and spoke of how there had been a threat to leave, but that now, as a 17-year-old, we had decided to stay and were instead going to earn more of our own keep. And I would merely point out that I personally left home finally at the age of 24, so I'm very much looking forward to how the next 7 years of the Parliament's journey will develop. But what I wanted to look at, Presiding Officer, having served on both Devolution and Further Powers and on the Finance Committee, I thought it would be remiss of me not to look a little bit at the fiscal framework and also some of the financial elements that relate. I think what was very clear very early on was that there was a disagreement, I think we would term it, in terms of what no detriment constituted in relation to how the fiscal framework was to operate. And I think it is a testament to the negotiating skills of the Deputy First Minister that he was able to arrive at a position where the Treasury agreed with the definition that the Scottish Government applied, albeit there was perhaps a slightly more tortuous route taken to get to the methodology because the Treasury seemed unwilling to sign up to what the Scottish Government had initially put on the table. In terms of how things will operate in future, I think there are a number of areas which this Parliament is going to have to pay very close attention to and give very careful scrutiny to. The first is in relation to tax avoidance and tax evasion, because in terms of the collection of income tax and the Scottish income tax, that will remain the preserve of HMRC. And while the Scottish Government, in establishing Revenue Scotland for the collection of land and buildings transaction tax and landfill tax, has established a very strong and widely regarded as very strong anti-avoidance mechanism within that legislation, we are aware that there is still a great deal of tax that goes unpaid at a UK level. And so there will be a need to scrutinise the measures that are being taken by HMRC in relation to the collection of Scottish income tax, because that will have a material impact on the funds that are available to this Parliament for future use. The second is around some of the limitations that do exist, and I think that I'm not seeking to play down the role that this Parliament will have in terms of setting tax rates and bans in the future. But we should also remember that there are elements of income tax that will still not be in the preserve of this Parliament. The first is around the personal allowance, and the second is around savings and dividend income. And should individuals be in a position to transfer income from their regular income into dividend income, that money would not be readily available to this Parliament. It would flow instead to the Treasury through dividend. And there would be, I think there needs to be some consideration given over time, if that proves to be material, how we go about addressing some of that. And I think the final point I would make, Presiding Officer, is that I think with these powers coming and with the experience that we've had in relation to how land and buildings transaction tax has operated since it was established, and the forestalling that we saw at the initial stage, we need, I think, as a Parliament to consider how we do things in terms of our budget setting processes in future. because we are now going to be in a position where we will be, as part of that budget process, announcing potentially changes to tax rates, changes to tax bands, and that obviously potentially triggers behavioural change amongst those who would be paying. And the further out that that change is signposted, the more likely it becomes that behavioural change will take effect, and that has an impact in both that financial year and then also the coming financial year in which the changes are to take effect. So I think that we need to look very carefully at the way that the budgets are constructed within this Parliament, how they are consulted upon, and we need to rethink some of the old thinking which was fine when we were only responsible for dealing with a block grant, and we didn't have to worry about the potential behavioural changes that might come. But in future years, if we are to be expecting a Finance Secretary to stand up and announce the potential tax rates some 6 months in advance, we have to bear in mind the behavioural effects that that could give rise to, and I think we have to consider what we do with those and how we set budgets in future.